Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we are looking at Galatians chapter 5 and starting at verse 24 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we look into verse 24, Paul says, and they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. And as we look at this verse, we need to remember that in verses 19 through 21, Paul here is talking about the works of the flesh. And then in verses 22 and 23, he's talking about the fruit of the Spirit. And so you have the flesh and what the flesh lusts for, warring against the Spirit of God and what the Spirit wants to work in our heart. And he says, and they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. And it says here, they have crucified. And it means to put something to death, to cause a separation of two things. When Jesus was crucified, he separated himself from this world and would no longer relate to this world as he had done in his human body. So when something is crucified, it means that there's a separation. Okay? Now, when we think of crucifixion, there's always death, because to be crucified on the cross obviously results in death. But there can be a daily crucified, right? Paul said, I die daily, right? I die daily. Paul was crucifying himself every day to this world system. We also will be separated from this world system, and we will receive a glorified body. There is when we are separated from this world upon death, that's like our crucifixion. We crucify this world to ourselves, like Jesus did. When he was crucified, it meant that he was separated from this world system. But there is also another crucifixion that we can experience while we are still here on this earth. And it is the crucifixion of our affections and our lusts. Okay? It's to have crucified affections and crucified lusts. Now, affections and lusts both speak of those inner desires, those impulses, those cravings, those longings that proceed from our sinful flesh. Now, in the context of what Paul is writing here in verse 24, and they that are Christ have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts, is he talking about crucifixion that results in my physical death leaving this earth? Or is he talking about a crucifixion, spiritual crucifixion, from a separation from my lusts, from my desires, from my longings and cravings? And I think in context, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about the crucifixion, that the putting off is talking about a separation from these evil, sinful desires and these cravings that war against the soul, that war against the Holy Spirit. And the reason why it's talking about that in context is Paul just got done saying about the works of the flesh and also the fruit of the Spirit, the war between the flesh and the Spirit, the lusts of the flesh and the desires of the Holy Spirit working in us. So here, it would only be natural that he would continue that same thought. So he says, and they that are Christ's, those that have been saved, they have crucified, they have put to death what? The flesh with the affections and lusts. Now, if we are a Christian, then we are to, with the help from the Holy Spirit and with his guidance, we are to crucify these cravings, these longings, so we can live free, a free life unto God. And this is what Paul is talking about. If we crucify the flesh, we can live free unto God. And we don't have to live according to the law or according to our being bondage to our sinful nature, our cravings and longings, but we can be free from that. Why? Because daily, like Paul said, I die daily. We can, in the morning when we wake up, we can determine to crucify ourselves and go to the cross every time we're tempted. Every time there's this craving or longing building up within us, we can go to the cross of Christ, pray and seek him, and crucify that desire. To not crucify the flesh daily means that we will live in the bondage of these lusts. And if, again, whatever sin we commit, if we continue to commit that habitually, we become in bondage to that sin. If we practice sin, we've become a slave to that sin. We become a slave to our own desires and our own lusts within us. And Jesus came to set us free from those bondages while we're here on earth. Eventually, yes, we will be free because we will die physically and leave this earth. But while we are on this earth, we can still live a free life, not in bondage to our sinful nature, our sinful desires and cravings. So this is what Paul is saying, and they that are Christ, they have crucified the flesh with its affections and with its lusts that war against the Spirit. And then in verse 25, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. And he says here, if, and this Greek word if is I, E-I, and it's in the first class condition, which means, in the Greek, it means if and it's true. In the Greek, there are 4 conditional clauses. There's first class condition, which is if and it is. Second class condition is if and it isn't. Third class condition is if and it may be true. Fourth class condition is if and it may be true, but pretty much it isn't true. Okay? So this is a first class condition. If and it's true. This is what Paul is saying. He says, if we live in the Spirit, and he says here we, he includes the Galatians, the Galatian people who have been saved under Paul's preaching and teaching, and the same Galatian people who are now being tempted and drawn away by these Judaizers to start implementing the law of Moses in their life and observing the law of Moses. Okay? But so he includes them. He says, if we live in the Spirit. So Paul says, if, and it is absolutely true that you and I live in the Spirit. So Paul is saying that it is absolutely true that the Galatian believers have the Holy Spirit living within them. So even though they are being deceived and drawn away by the Judaizers, does not mean that the Holy Spirit left them and went back up into heaven. Okay? Or left them and said, I'll be back. I'll be back when you get right with God. When you start living by grace, I'll be back. No, no. The Holy Spirit was still in them. The Holy Spirit was still in their life. So he says, if we live in the Spirit, then let us also walk in the Spirit. And this Greek word for walk is stoikeo, and it means a row, like something in a row. It means to walk in a straight line. It means how we live our life. And this Greek word, stoikeo, is in the present tense, and it's in the active voice. So, present tense means, Paul says here, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk. Present tense means right now, at this moment. If you are saved, and Paul said you are, and it means us too, if we are saved, and we are, and we have the Spirit of God living within us, then right now, today, at this moment, let us also be walking in the Spirit. Walk here right now means you produce the action of the verb. It's in the active voice. It's not passive voice. It's active voice, meaning right now you actively produce the action of walking in the Spirit. So, as Christians, it is not enough to just be saved and have the Holy Spirit living within us, but we need to decide that we will live every day as unto God. How? Crucifying our fleshly desires and living under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So when we look at this in this whole context, Paul says in verse 24, and they that are Christ have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts, and coupled with that, verse 25, now if, and it's true, that we are living in the Spirit is living in us, then let us walk in the Spirit. Every moment, moment by moment, let us crucify these works of the flesh, and let us walk in the fruit of the Spirit. Walk in God's agape love. Walk in temperance. Walk in patience. Walk in kindness. Walk in gentleness, right? Walk in the meekness of God. Let us walk in those things. Let us crucify the flesh. Die to that sinful desire, that sinful thing, while we're here on earth. And let us daily, moment by moment, walk in the Spirit, okay? And that's what Paul is trying to encourage them to do while they're here on earth. And we got a lot to say in this next verse, verse 26, so I'll leave that until next lesson, all right? Until next lesson then, walk with the Lord. I know He walks with you.